Chodesh Tov. I'm so excited to be here and have the privilege of learning with all of you today. Thank you, Zamira, for that over-the-top introduction. And I think that it's really interesting because sometimes when we're new at something we think, oh, everyone else has it all together, but really everyone is just figuring it out. And I think that years later I'm still figuring it out. And today I'd like to figure out some things about Shavuot with all of you. What? Oh, okay, yeah. So Zamira said, can you speak about something related to Shavuot? And so I said, sure, b'simcha. And when I thought about Shavuot, I really thought, well, when we experience something, if we end or exit that experience the same way that we entered, then what was the experience really for? And so I started to think about what are we aiming for with the experience of Shavuot, and can we come out a little bit different other than the added pounds from the cheesecake, right? Can we come out a little bit different after Shavuot? And if so, what would that look like? What is the true essence or the overarching theme of Shavuot? So I started to look, and I have to apologize, the sheets that I sent were the wrong ones, and they have Shem Hashem on them. So I really apologize. It's actually Gniza, so everyone just has to be careful with that. If you don't want them, I'll take them and dispose of them properly in Gniza. So in any case, when we look at Shavuot, there are a few things that stand out, and we know this already from the names of Shavuot. In the Torah, Shavuot is known by several different names. We have Chag Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, Chag HaKatzir, the harvest holiday, Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of the first fruits, and of course, also Chazal, based on the date and the timing and the Psukim in Parshat Yitro, we call it Chag Matan Toratenu, the holiday of the giving of the Torah. So, and Shavuot, of course, is the only Chag in the Torah that isn't given a date. It is 49 days after bringing of the Korban HaOmer. And so we have to count those days. As we know, we're in the middle of Sfirat HaOmer. Better? Yeah. No? Is this better? What? It's not working? Now it's working. Okay, I have to hold it close. Okay. Yes. Is that good? Yes? Okay. So I'd like to take a look at some of the places where Shavuot is mentioned in the Torah, and through comparisons we will try to figure out what the essence of Shavuot is and what we can learn from it. So the two main places that describe the holiday, and not just a quick mention or the korbanot of it, are in Vayikra and Parshat Emor, and in Parshat Re'eh and Sefer Dvarim. So source 1 on your sheets, we begin Shavuot. Any discussion of Shavuot has to start with Sfirat HaOmer because it is intimately linked to that. It doesn't have its own date, like we said. And so in source 1, it says, "Usfartem b'chani ma'acharat haShabbat miyom aviachem et Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot tmeimot tihiana. Ad mimacharat haShabbat hashvi'it tisberu 50 yom v'hikravtem mincha chadasha l'Adonai." So we have to count the 49, or really here it says 50, but we count 49 days. The 50th day is Shavuot. And on that day, we have counted the days and the weeks. And we bring the Mincha Chadasha, which is from the new grain, the new wheat harvest. The Korban HaOmer, of course, is from the barley harvest. פסוק י"ז, ממושבותיכם תביאו לחם תנופה, 2 שני עשרונים סוד תהיינה, 5 תאפנה ביקורים לאדוני. So here we see that the korban that we bring is accompanied by the shtei alechem. I'm not sure if it's gonna. Okay, you can try it. Sorry. Okay. Maybe. All right, I don't think so. So here we see the word bikurim for the first time related to the Chag. Bikurim being the first fruits. So we look in Sefer Vayikra and we see that we are counting days, we are counting weeks So there's some sort of a process. We're going from the Korban HaOmer to the Mincha Chadasha, so from barley to the more refined wheat. That's also indicating a process. And we have this transition sort of feel for the holiday. And finally, after listing the korbanot in the next few psukim, we have in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Ukratem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yeh lachem, kumlechet avodah lo ta'asu, chukat olam bechol moshvotechem ledorotechem. So in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, we don't have a name for the holiday. We have just the generic holy convocation or celebration, a sacred occasion for you. So the description is one of process, and we aren't even given a name, a proper name for the holiday. And finally, before the Torah continues on to the next Chag, which is Rosh Hashanah, we have an extra mitzvah stuck in to the description. ובקוצריכם את קציר ארצכם, לא תכלה פאת שדך בקוצריך, ולקט קצירך לא תלקט, לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. So, after the description of the Chag, we have two mitzvot, the mitzvah of Pe'ah, leaving the corner of the field uncut, and the mitzvah of Leket, that we don't go back and pick up the gleanings, the stalks that have fallen. Those are left for the poor people to collect. So it's a very strange place for it. We have this mitzvah in other places, in Kititza and in Parshat Kedoshim. So the fact that all of a sudden it's just stuck right in here, even though it's the time of year when we would be doing these mitzvot, but b'chol zot, it's a little bit strange. That's the description in Sefer Vayikra. Let's move now to Sefer Dvarim. In Sefer Dvarim, we have a shorter description. The korbanot are not mentioned, and we start out as follows: Shiv'a Shavuot tispor lach mehechel chermesh bakama tachel tispor Shiv'a Shavuot. So right away, what do we notice? What's missing from this description? In verse 9 in chapter 16, you shall count off 7 weeks. Start to count the 7 weeks when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Yeah, we're not told to count the days. In Sefer Dvarim, we're only counting the weeks. And as a result of that, in Pasuk Yud, Ve'asita chag Shavuot l'Adonai Elohecha, misat nidvat yadcha asher titen ka'asher yivarechecha Adonai Elohecha. So what is it called here? It's called Shavuot, and the emphasis is on the weeks and not on the days. Furthermore, in Pasuk Yud Aleph, we're told, what should we do? We're not told about any of the korbanot, but v'samachta lifnei Adonai Elohecha, ata uvincha uvitecha ve'abtecha ve'amatecha ve'halevi asher b'sharecha ve'hager ve'hayatom ve'ha'almana asher b'kirbecha v'makom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha d'shaken shemo sham. So we're told to have a big celebration. And who's included? Everyone. Bring everyone. And here we see, and then the following pasuk before we finish, and we also have to remember where we came from. So look around, bring in everyone, and don't forget where you came from. So we have these sort of two parallel descriptions, a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. So those are what we're going to start with, and we're going to, B'ezrat Hashem, come back to that shortly. Before we do, I want to focus on the mitzvah of bikurim. We know that in source 3 on your sheets, you have 3 psukim. One is from Parshat Mishpatim, one is from Kitisa, and one is from Pinchas. And those 3 psukim also describe Shavuot very quickly. Chag HaKatzir Bikurei Ma'asecha Asher Tizra B'Sadeh. So the first time it's called Chag HaKatzir. Next, and it mentions the Bikurim. Next, we have V'chag Shavuot Ta'aseh Lecha Bikurei Katzir. Again, it's called Shavuot, but we don't forget to mention the Bikurim, those first fruits. And finally, in Pinchas, Uv'yom HaBikurim, here the Chag itself is called by the name of first fruits. V'akrivchem mincha chadasha l'Adonai b'shavuotechem, mikra kodesh yeh lachem, u'mlechet avodah lo ta'asu. So again and again, in different ways, no matter what the Chag is called, we have an emphasis on the Bikurim, on those first fruits. So if we take a look at the big picture, we have the description of the actual Bikurim not in any of these parshiot of the Moadim that describe all the holidays, but they're in Parshat Ki Tavo. Before we enter the land, in Sefer Devarim, source 4 on your sheets, we have the Parsha of Bikurim. And the Parsha of Bikurim is very familiar to us. Why is it so familiar to us? It's in the Haggadah, right? It's a very strange thing that the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim that we tell is not from Shmot, which is the book of Yetziat Mitzrayim, but it's from Devarim, from the story of Bikurim. And what do? The section starts, "V'haya ki tavo el ha'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala v'yishta v'yashav tabas." You come into the land, when you come into the land, and you're going to inherit the land that Hashem has given you. "V'lakachta me'reshit kol pri ha'adama asher tavi me'artzecha asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach v'sam tavatena v'halachta el ha'makom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha leshaken shemo sham." So when you come, you're going to take all of your first fruits, put them in a basket, and bring them to the place Hashem decides, which is, of course, Yerushalayim, and you're going to present them to the Kohen. And this is the mitzvah of Bikurim. And when you give it to the Kohen, then you have what's called the Vidui Bikurim, right, the statement of intent. And you start with a history lesson. So what does the person say? Again, we know this from the Haggadah, starting in Pasuk Hey. Right? All of these psukim about our national history. What happened? We went down to Mitzrayim, we were slaves there, and then Hashem took us out with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, and so on. Until he brought us to this land, Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash. Ve'ata, Pasuk Yud, הנה הבאתי את ראשית פרי האדמה אשר נתת לי אדוני והנחתו לפני אדוני אלוהיך והשתחווית לפני אדוני אלוהיך ושמחת בכל הטוב אשר נתן אדוני אלוהיך לביתך אתה והלוי והגר אשר בקרבך. So we have this whole procession, we bring the first fruits and a big celebration. And this is, of course, going to be happening on Shavuot, which is Chag HaBikurim. So on the one hand, each person has to bring their own. And we see that in Psukim Aleph until Hey, right, when we talk about the person doing it, it's in the singular. When you come into the land, singular, you will take the produce and you will bring it to the Kohen. But then, when the person with the first fruits goes to the Kohen and says the whole story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right, the whole national history, then it's in the plural. Because then we have a situation where, in fact, it's our joint history, right? And so each person is bringing his own, but we're doing it together. And we're not going, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the Mishnayot that I brought in source 5, but they're very beautiful, right? That basically everyone would come, in Mishnah in Masechet Bikurim, everyone would come to Yerushalayim, but how would they do it? They wouldn't just take their stuff, put it in the basket and go. They would, all these people from the small villages would go into the closest city, and they would sleep in the street in the city so as not to become tamei. And then in the morning, they would be awoken by a person in charge of being the city alarm clock. And everybody would wake up, and he would say, Kumu v'na'aleh Tzion el beit Adonai Eloheinu, right? Pasuk in Yirmiyahu. So it was this very private thing on the one hand, because it's your first fruits, but on the other hand, everyone's doing it together. And then the Mishnah continues, I didn't even bring it, but the Mishnah Gimel there, in Perek Gimel, describes this tahalucha, this big parade, which many places in Israel do nowadays, a reenactment of the Bikurim parade. And Mishnah Dalet describes how even the King Agrippas, would put the basket on his shoulder, and he himself would bring it, and not have a servant do it. It was such an important, beloved mitzvah. So we have this tension with the Bikurim between the private and the communal, between bringing it and feeling a connection to your own produce and the national history, and that you're doing this with everyone. So Rav Shaiki has a very interesting idea about the connection. Why are we bringing Bikurim on Shavuot? So on the one hand, it's very practical. There was Aliyah LaRegel in any case, so it's a great time. This is when you're harvesting, may as well. But there's another idea that's fundamental to Bikurim. What Shaiti says is that the Torah is given to someone who understands that the best, goes to someone else. It goes to Hashem. And in return, Hashem gives to us his best. He gives us his Torah. And that relationship starts to be built through the Bikurim. So we have this constant, push and pull between the communal and the individual, between living my private, very physical life and the life of Kedusha that's related to Hashem. And I think that we get that from the Bikurim. Now, the next idea I wanted to touch on is the idea of leket. Remember, in source 1, the last pasuk, in pasuk Chav Bet, it says that you have to, by the way, while you're doing all of this, keeping these mitzvot, you need to leave the pei'ah on the corner of the field and the leket. And focus for now on the leket, partly because it's so prevalent in Megillat Ruth, right, which we read, of course, on Shavuot. Most people are sleeping because they've been up all night, but Megillat Ruth, which we look at Ruth as one of our role models, and what do we see? Ruth comes back with Naomi. They are destitute, despite the fact that they were accustomed to a very high lifestyle, and Ruth says, as long as I can be with OUisrael, it will be okay, and I'm going to go to the field, and she goes to Boaz's field, and she starts to lelaket. What does it mean, lilkot? It means that you are bending down and picking up grain one stalk at a time. This is backbreaking labor, right? How did they actually harvest grain? They would put their arm around forget about how they do it today, right, with machines, but they would take the kama, the standing grain, and they would gather it in their arm, and then they would take a sickle and scoop it all at once, and then it would be bound together as a sheaf. And it was not easy work, but it was reasonable. But leket is the idea that you're going after the harvesters, and whatever fell, one by one, you're picking up those stalks of grain. And not only did Ruth pick up those grains, but in Perek Bet Pasuk Yuzayin we see Vatilaked b'sadeh ad ha'erev v'tachbot et asher likta v'hi ke'efas se'orim. So she gathers all of the individual stalks. At night she does the beating of the grain to get away all of the chaff, and she ends up with an ephah. An ephah is a huge amount. It's like somewhere between, depending on what shiurim you use, somewhere between 25 to 43 liters. Okay, so think about the size of a liter bottle. So at least 25 of those is the amount of the kernels of wheat without the chaff that she was able to gather. So we see that she is quite industrious and not afraid of hard work. But when we talk about leket, there are so many other images that come to mind. If you look in source 7, we have Hashem as a melakit as well. V'haya bayom hahu yachbot Adonai mishibolet hanahar ad nachal Mitzrayim v'atem tuluktu le'echad echad b'nei Yisrael. It's such a beautiful pasuk. Hashem, when we are in Galut, he will go down to the Euphrates River and he will one by one glean the fallen stalks of Am Yisrael. The Jews that didn't come back, the Jews that were lost, the Jews that we could have forgotten about, God forbid. And so this is the imagery that's used. And in Shir HaShirim, in the beautiful love song between Am Yisrael and Hashem, we see the pasuk, Dodi yarad legano la'ugat habosem lirot baganim v'lilkot shoshanim. So my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to look in the gardens and pick the shoshanim, the lilies or the roses. And the Sforno says, Suridei amo miben hachochim. Hashem is picking his nation from the thorns that we've gotten stuck in our long galut. So we start to see this imagery of leket as representative not just of someone who cares and not just someone who's willing to do hard work, but we see that the imagery really is that every soul is important. We can't think about the mitzvah of leket without understanding the figurative nature that Hashem is going to collect every member of OUisrael, and that Ruth is praiseworthy because she is acting the way Hashem acts, that she doesn't disregard a single stalk. And by the way, the word leket, the shoresh of leket, that root, appears 12 times in Megillat Ruth, more than in any other sefer of Tanakh, even though Megillat Ruth is only 4 prakim. And I would say that perhaps that's a wink to the 12 Shvatim, which will not be forgotten, and no Jew will be forgotten. And we won't go through it right now, but not the word leket, but who else was binding sheaves? Who else was bringing grain together? In the dream of Yosef that the brothers got so upset about, he was also me'almim alumim, he says to the brothers. We were all bundling up our sheaves. And again, what was Yosef trying, albeit unsuccessfully at that time, to do? He was trying to unite all the brothers, that we're going to be one nation, one family, regardless of whose mother was the beloved wife and whose mother was not. But we're going to be all together. And in that place, the Alter Rebbe in source 10 says, sorry, I said I wasn't going to do it, but I can't resist. Right? He says 3 lines down, Hayu mitchabrim sham yachad v'hayu la'achadim sheharei nichlalu ba'achdut Hashem. So he was joining everyone together, and they were all united in the achdut of Hashem. That was the dream. That was the dream that didn't happen for many more years. And further down he says, Mitchila hayu hashibolim mefuradim zamizeh ve'al yedei kshira zo hayu la'achadim. So when he's binding the sheaves, everyone was scattered, separate. And Yosef HaTzadik had a dream, and the dream was that everyone, all of OUisrael, will be united. So I think that we can look at the mitzvah of leket and why is it stuck in the middle of the halacha, or the mitzvah of Shavuot, and why is it so important and stressed in Megillat Ruth, which we read on Shavuot. I don't think that's an accident, right? Leket is the collection of the forgotten, the ones who fell by the wayside, the ones that maybe other people thought they're not worth the effort. It's too hard. I have to bend down and pick up each one. And Ruth is following in the footsteps of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and saying, no, everyone is important. Every kernel of grain can be a little bit of nutrition, and every Jew will add to the fabric of OUisrael. And if we compare leket to bikurim, just to remember where we started, right? The bikurim is reshit. Bikurim is those big moments. You go with your basket, and the wealthier people had golden and silver baskets. It's described in the Mishnah, and it was with a big fanfare, and the whole nation was there. But there's also acharit, and we're not going to forget the acharit. And Ruth walks after the harvesters, and she says, we won't forget the shibolim that fell. And so that's the mitzvah of leket. Okay, so let's now look, right, one more aspect of Shavuot. There's so many different aspects of Shavuot. When a chag has so many names, we know there's going to be a lot there. Okay, so we have to look now at Sfirat HaOmer. And in Sefer Vayikra, as we mentioned, we have the days and the weeks. And it's a great mitzvah. It's an extended mitzvah that lasts 7 weeks. We think that we've just created mindfulness in this generation. No, this is every single day to know Hayom Esrim Yamim LaOmer, Shehem, right? And every single day we have a mitzvah just to count what this day is. But then we also add it together and say, well, there are bigger units. Those days, they're not individuals. They add up. They're unified into weeks. And all 7 weeks are unified into Sfirat HaOmer, which will bring us from the barley korban of the Korban HaOmer to the wheat korban of the Mincha Chadasha, and that refinement. And we know that we now have we're knowing to talk about the Sfirot, right? The Kabbalistic Sfirot, we take the 7 lower Sfirot, each one is parallel to a different week in Sfirat HaOmer, and then we have every possible permutation between the day and the week, right? Chesed shebehod, Netzach shebegvura, and so on. So what are we working on? We're trying to take all of our different midot during this time period and integrate them. And saying, I'm not compartmentalizing, I'm taking all of the parts of me, and I'm bringing it together to serve Hashem. And the Pasuk says, Usfartem lachem mimachat HaShabbat. Why to us? Because this is our counting, this is our group counting, lachem, and also our individual counting. The korban is brought together, but the mitzvah of counting is each individual. And finally, we saw in Sefer Dvarim, with everyone, right? It has the pasuk is in Sefer Dvarim in source 2. It's almost you have to get out of breath from reading V'tzamachta lifnei Adonai Elohecha ata uvincha uvitecha v'abdecha v'amatecha v'halevi asher b'sharecha v'hager v'hayatom v'ha'almana asher b'kirbecha v'makom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha l'shaken shemo sham. So when we have such an emphasis on including everyone in the celebration. And we have a similar pasuk, by the way, with regards to Sukkot. But there it says, V'samachta b'chagecha. Here it says, V'samachta lifnei Adonai Elohecha. And there it says that you should bring everyone in b'sha'arecha, asher b'sha'arecha. And here, the less fortunate members of our society, it says, that they are b'kirbecha. They are within you. So we have here a real unification. We're unifying our own souls. We're trying to bring in all of those parts and all of those pieces. And we're unifying OUisrael. And we see this, I think, through the Bikurim and through the Leket and through Sfirat HaOmer itself. So now we'll just add one more aspect to this. And that's, of course, Matan Torah. Right? We can't talk about Shavuot without mentioning the aspect of Matan Torah. And in source 13 on your sheet, we have the description of OUisrael camped at the base of Har Sinai. And Pasuk Ben, it says, Vayis'u mirfidim vayevo'u midbar Sinai vayachanu bamidbar vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. They camped Vayichan sham in the singular. And Rashi says famously, Ki ish echad belev echad, like one person with one heart. OUisrael, at this point in history, was totally united as individual organisms that have all joined together for a singular purpose. And when we received the mitzvot, we used those mitzvot as a pillar with which to ascend to unite with Hashem. So here we have the unification of ourselves, the unification of the Am, and unification with Hashem. So there's one more thing that I want to touch on before we finish. We could finish here, but it's 2025. And when we talk about unity, and when we talk about the group collective, there's a little bit of pushback today, I have to be honest, because everyone is an individual. And everyone has, well, if I join the group, then what happens to me as an individual? So Rav Hutner here brings a beautiful idea in the Pachad Yitzchak, in Mamar Chaf Aleph, and he discusses the idea that because of the fact that Adam was created as a single person, we have the idea of Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created for me. And each one of us can say that as a descendant of that primordial father, right? And at the same time, because of that, we're all children of one father. Not just Adam HaRishon, but of Hashem.